Good morning. Hey, this is David Benson, CEO and founder of Cornhusker Hybrids in Lincoln, Nebraska, where our trademark and motto is success starts with the seed. No truer words have ever been spoken in agriculture. Today we're going to launch into one of my favorite topics, 7 deadly sins of plant breeding. And if you commit these deadly sins, any of them or all of them, you will never be successful in plant breeding. But as you go back to the name of the 7 deadly sins, it just kind of comes from a list of Christian vices or ways of living that people over the time have come to agree that's not healthy for you. So they call them the 7 deadly sins. And I don't know that they're listed in order, but I'm going to list them in order, and I'm going to offset a deadly sin of plant breeding with each one of them. But they're lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, envy, wrath, and pride. So today, I'm going to launch into number 7, because I start in the bottom order and I work up. So number 7 is failure to choose the right germplasm. That is your deadly sin number 7. This is the deadliest sin of all sins, because if you don't get this one right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who your research director is. It doesn't matter how many plots you can put in the field and harvest. It doesn't matter how good your genome selection is, or how good your drones are, or how good your AI is, or how much money you spend. Because if you don't have the right germplasm, you're going to lose to someone that has all the things I just talked about, and they have better germplasm. So if you're starting a program, you have to choose germplasm to use in your program for the rest of the career. And oftentimes this is more of a university position in the U.S. where they have their whole career to develop their program. When you're working in the real world, you have like 3 years to do your job, and if you don't do it right, they fire you. So if you're out there, there's 2 things you got to do. You either got to upgrade your germplasm, or you have to choose the right germplasm, replace germplasm. So if you're going to choose the right germplasm, well, how do you do that? Well, first thing is you got to know the traits that you want, the primary traits. And you have to also know like the secondary traits that you need. And then there's what I call sleeper traits, which are the traits that you may not see very often that you need. In other words, to have the best germplasm in your market segment, where your genotype, your hybrid, your sugar beet, your cassava, your rice, your alfalfa, your maize, your soybeans, your beans, watermelons, whatever it is you raise, you have got to have the best germplasm. Because as they'll say in the Midwest where I live, you can't make something good out of a sow's ear. So in other words, that means that you can't create something from nothing. So again, how do you do it? Well, you're going to go to people that have been successful, programs that have been successful, places where you have germplasm that you can access. And of course, you always want to access germplasm that can be proprietary to you and you have the right to use. You don't want to go out and take some germplasm and prove it, and then have somebody else come along and claim it, or have to share it with you. Now in the U.S., just where I live, there's one kind of example I can use, in that there are a number of commercial lines that come off patent. And they've been on patent for 18 years. These are the progenitors, the parents, the grandparents of the inbred lines being used now. So you know they have the right stuff in them if you can find it. And because of this, there has been kind of a body of research that's went into combining ability of these lines, sequencing genome of these lines, genome selection of the lines, phenotypic data on the lines, molecular marker data on the lines, and most of this is public, and the lines are public. So you can put that together and you can come up with some pretty good germplasm. That's as an example. If you're other places in the world, there's gene banks, there's universities that offer germplasm, there's private programs like, it's not a private program, but CIMMYT, where you can get germplasm throughout the world, particularly in maize, that you can use. But you've got to have the traits you need. Now, some of that you can tell, like in the PVPs, from the phenotypes, the genotypes, but probably you're going to have to screen some of these materials. And what is probably the #1 trait in the whole entire world for any crop in any field and any time is drought tolerance. And actually, there are ways that you can screen for drought tolerance and be fairly successful. And if you want to get really into it, you can be very successful because you can manage that environment to very precise levels. As an example, now it might be standability, it might be dry down, it might be plant height, it might be mold resistance, it might be disease resistance. In my case, it might be brittle snap, where we get winds and it breaks the corn off below the primary ear and you get no yield. But you got to know those primary traits, you got to know the secondary traits, and you got to know the sleeper traits. And those are the ones that you may not see, but you still got to have. Where I'm at, it's like Goss's wilt resistance, which is a bacterial disease, and green snap in corn, because you might not see them for 5 years and then you see them. And it's a big deal. So you have to put those things together. So if you're sitting there as a new plant breeder, you got to have your primary traits, you got to have your secondary traits, and you got to have your sleeper traits, and you got to put that material in the most elite germplasm possible. Don't kid yourself. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, as I said before. You cannot produce something from nothing. You are a breeder, you are not a wonderkin, okay? You got to work with what you have. So where you start is a big deal. So you have to work with the most elite material. You cannot, don't even think about anything else. I had a guy to say to me, well, what if I went out, got some of these old Iowa State populations, and I fooled around with them, and I wanted to strangle him. First, that's very old material. Second, he said, fool around. You ain't got time to fool around. You got a world to feed. You got people that are hungry. You've got strife, and it can be solved by increasing genetic gain. So you have to choose the best germplasm that has the best chance to improve the rate of genetic gain, and you have to work to do it. All right? You have to work to do it. It's not going to happen. So if you don't have the right germplasm, you cannot win. If you don't have the primary and secondary and tertiary traits, in the long run, you're going to be pulling in more germplasm to do that, and you can. You can't you're not going to be any better than the material you start with. You have to compromise to bring your traits together. And wonderkin breeders, you're not that brilliant. Get this material, put it in the right environments, test it properly, and let the germplasm tell you what's best. And absolutely believe the data and collect the best data possible. So in other words, you got to choose the right germplasm, and you and your group have to do every single thing to improve the accuracy of the genetic gain with this material, to get it to be productive, even in a small area. And if you can't do this, you need to move into another crop, or into population development, or into biodiversity maintenance, or into university programs. Because none of those things apply to what I'm saying here. I'm talking to the commercial pipeline breeders that are at the end of the pipeline with the best material, and they have got to do a better job, and it all starts with what the company or the individual chooses to work with, which you can choose, and you can select, and you can improve. And you have to be able to improve that. Believe the data, select the best, most elite material possible, evaluate it in absolutely the most precise, scientific, common sense manner you can, and move forward as fast as you can with all the science you can apply to it, and make that your mission when you come to work every day. So the number one, the first sin, number 7 of the 7 deadly sins of plant breeding is failure to choose the right germplasm. Mess that up and you're doomed to failure. Do a better job than average and you will probably beat them over time. So again, this is David Benson with Cornhusker Hybrids in Lincoln, Nebraska, saying success starts with the seed. I'll see you next week with deadly sin number 6.